You ready? Welcome back to Fabrication 101, everybody. It's so nice to have you guys back in the shop with me. Some exciting announcement here for you guys. I'm super excited about this. My Bronco is back in the garage, and what's weird is that it feels a lot bigger than it did when it was outside, or I don't know, maybe it's just in a different spot. But the cage is all in and painted. It's just a rattle can paint called Canyon Black. It's a satin black, which I did just because if I ever have to touch things up, and I'm already, there are some spots that I already need to touch up. It shouldn't be too much to do. So today I'm going to work on getting the cage finalized and in. There's some spots like here where it still needs to be welded. This plate here ties into a tube that runs all the way to the front of the Bronco for a lot of added strength. It does need to be bolted in the floor. You can't really see that. There is a place on the frame where it needs to be welded in. So on the frame there, it needs to be fully welded. And then in the back, these parts here, this needs to get completely welded, welded around there. And then I want to make a plate to go back in here and weld that. And that plate, I want to put some dimple dies in. And that, once I get it all tied in and everything, that's what I want to work on in this video. So let's get it bolted in and look at seeing if we can do some welding. So my cage, the front part right here, bolts down to the floor, through the floor, to a foot pad underneath that ties into the bottom of the frame. So I've got some grade 8, 1 1/4, 3/8 bolts to go in here. And one thing that will make this job a little easier is using a long tapered punch or a drift. Not really sure what the difference is between a punch and a drift. If you know, maybe leave me a comment down below and then I'll know. But these are really nice for using to line up the holes, especially when you have more than one plate that needs to be lined up. Gives you some ability to wiggle things around a little bit and get the holes to line up a little bit easier for you. So we'll try and get these in. Some of them are going to be a little tricky, like this one underneath here. Yeah, that one actually wasn't that bad. So that dropped right in there. You can see where I wiggled the drift a little bit, or the punch, and it helped it to drop right in there. So let's try this up here. That one's in. That one's gonna be a little bit more tricky. Let's try the inside one. That one's down. And the last one, which I might have to actually kind of turn in a little bit. I try not to hammer on them a ton. A little bit of that. It's not quite wanting to go in there. I don't want to hit too hard because I don't want to damage the threads. There it goes. If it'll spin in by hand, it's probably going to be okay. So I'm going to go ahead and put the nuts and washers on the other side, and we'll get it tightened down. Driver's side's all buttoned down nice and tight, and so is the passenger side. Both sides dropped in pretty easily. It's kind of the way I hoped it would go. So now on the back, I want to make sure I get everything centered on the chassis. There's still a little bit of wiggle even though that front's bolted in tight. So I'm going to get this centered up, probably go ahead and get it tacked into place, check a couple other places, and then go ahead and start getting the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 places all welded in here. So I've run into kind of an interesting issue here. Some of my measurements are telling me that the frame needs to go one way, about 1/8 of an inch. And then my other measurements I take from different spots are telling me the frame needs to go the other way, about 1/8 of an inch. And so this is some of the things you can run into sometimes when you're doing this kind of stuff. In this case, I'm going to kind of split the difference, but most of all, I'm going to make sure it looks right to me. And I think that's an important thing that people need to consider. Sometimes you have to make things look right, especially when you're working on a vehicle that's 52 years old now. So I'm going to check a few other things and make sure everything looks right. Like I said, I'm going to kind of eyeball it as much as I can. Split the difference a little bit, and then I'm gonna go ahead and get it tacked. Well, the cage and the Bronco are now married. All right, so now that it's all welded, we got to work on this back panel here. That I'm gonna put some 1/8 inch material on there, and probably gonna go ahead and do some dimple dies up that, try and make it look cool. So first thing first for this piece here, we got to make ourselves a template to go there out of some cardboard or some ram board probably. Again, messing up cardboard is a whole lot cheaper and easier to redo than using your good material that you paid money for. So let's go find some cardboard. You guys aren't gonna believe this, but I found a piece of cardboard that works perfectly. Just kidding, I just cut that. I just didn't figure you guys would really wanna watch me do arts and crafts with some cardboard. So now that we've got that cut out and it does fit on that side as well, we're gonna go ahead and find some material, some 1/8 inch steel, cut out that shape, and then lay out some dimple dies. All right, so what I've got laid out here is a 2.5 inch dimple, a 2 inch, and an 1.5 inch. And one of the things I like to try to do is make sure that the edges of the flare or the radius or the dimple have about the same amount of space between them. And in this case, I should have about 3/4 of an inch between each one, between these three. I don't think I'm gonna do any more. I thought about maybe doing some smaller, like 1/2 inch ones. I think it might be a little too busy. You're not gonna be able to see this part for the most part anyhow. This is really, it's a structural piece to add a bunch of strength to the back of the cage. And I don't think it needs to have all that much detail in it. Besides, every one of those holes is a hole I have to drill by hand. These are going to have to be hole sawed, which after building that press, I'm a little bit hole sawed out, but we'll stack them together like we did before, clamp them nice and solid, and it shouldn't be too much work to knock these out. Holes are drilled, holes are cleaned up, did a quick deburr on them. Now it's over to test out the new press and see how well it works. I have no idea if this is going to work. These dimple dies are rated up to 3/16 inch thick material, which I've never done that thick in them. I've done 1/8 inch before, but not on a homemade shop press. So let's see how this goes. Not bad. All right, so they're all dimpled. They did get a little bit of a warp to them. I don't know if you can see that. Nothing that can't be dealt with fairly easily. I do find that particularly with this thicker material, I do end up with some warping when I do these dimple dies. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. I don't know. Surprisingly, the press worked really well. I didn't damage anything. I did end up putting my 3-inch die under here just to give it a little bit of a bigger footprint between these pieces of 1/4 inch material, because they are both bent now, but everything else looked good. Surprisingly, I could see this tube up here flexing a little bit. Carry this one over here. And they're tacked in there. They look pretty good. They are just tacked at the corners for now. And that side's tacked in there. Tack, tack, tack up there. I'm really pleased with the way those kind of tied up the back end. I got to lay out my... I'm not going to fully weld these. I'm going to stitch weld them. So I got to lay out my stitch welds.
Shut up and sit down.
Alrighty, they're all welded in. You can see I did go ahead and do some 3-inch stitch welds, spaced pretty evenly apart. I think they came out really good, considering. I think they're gonna do just fine. And then this side is all done. I just got to clean off all my markings and then scuff them down a little bit and get them painted. So that's going to do it for this video, you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Next time on Fabrication 101, I think we're going to be trying to tackle the rear fenders again, see if I can figure out a plan for those. Because if you remember in previous video, I said I wasn't quite 100% happy with the way those are looking. So there's something I want to try with those. And I think I will be tackling that in the next video. In the meantime, do me a favor, do yourself a favor and get out there and build something.